Russell, take one. Mark.
Maynard, thank you.
Thank
for doing
you.
The interview.
My pleasure.
I'm asking everyone to sort of tell me an anecdote about Maynard. Tell me a story. Funny ones, sad one, humorous one.
Well, I was really a child, believe it or not, during Maynard's prominent days. So what I remember most about him is just his presence. When he walked into a room, he took over everything that was there, both from his physical stature to the voice that came out of that beautiful body. So it was something special about being around him, even as a child.
Tell us about your father and your family and their importance to the Atlanta community. A little history.
When I think about my father in the Atlanta community, I think about someone.
You should say his name so we'll know, the audience will know who he is.
Okay. When I think about my father, Herman Russell, and the fact that he was a native Atlantan who loved the city and grew up in it back in the day when segregation was prominent and real and affected everyone's lives, I think about a man who had a determination to do something to change conditions for all people. So Atlanta was a special place even then. You had a lot of African Americans who owned businesses, who cared about the community, who focused in on developing the young people. And I think that both Herman Russell and Maynard Jackson grew up in that environment that really made them into the men that they became as adults. Can we cut? I'm a little nervous. I'm trying to get my voice together. I actually have some in my purse.
No, we have a little bottle.
Take a deep breath.
Pellegrino.
I know we just took you right into it.
Right. Thanks.
Like,
This will
Sarah,
work.
ready? Talk.
Hey, man. Oh, you
Yep.
guys should go to the other side.
Let me tell you.
And it's fine.
Okay.
We're all engrossed in this stuff.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Rolling. Up higher, and go ahead and call it.
Tornado Russell, take two.
And Mark.
Yeah, sometimes you just take a deep breath. You'll be fine. So again, tell us about your family and your father, Herman Russell.
My father, Herman Russell, was a native Atlantan, grew up in the Summerhill community here in Atlanta in the height of segregation. He was a young man who was determined to make a difference in the world and pursue his dreams. And he was fortunate to grow up in a community with great mentors, people who influenced his life, were great role models in spite of the obstacles and challenges they faced as business people, as teachers, as community leaders, as ministers. And he spoke fondly, especially of the ministers and business leaders in the community that he grew up in, and the focus that they placed on developing the character of the young men, especially, that were part of that community. Something that I really wish we had more of in today's environment.
So when he came up, John Wesley Dobbs was alive. What was his relationship with John Wesley Dobbs?
I'm not sure if he really had a direct relationship with John Wesley Dobbs, but he definitely had a relationship with the ministers. We were AME at the time, so Bishop Wilkes, Bishop Hickman, there were bishops in the AME church that really shaped the way he approached the various things that he did. And he spoke fondly of Dr. King, Dr. Borders, those ministers that were part of that community that he was raised in.
What was his personal relationship with Maynard?
My father, Herman Russell, was a few years older than Maynard. So Maynard was a young, smart lawyer. And my father spoke fondly of how smart he was, how eloquently he spoke. He supported Maynard in his first, I believe he was co-treasurer of Maynard's first campaign for mayor, which he was successful in '73, I believe, and was co-treasurer of that campaign. And actually, he had been a supporter of Sam Massell when he was mayor, and really made a choice to support Maynard in spite of his relationship with Mayor Massell, because he knew it was the right thing to do, and he saw it as the right time for a young African American to be mayor of the city of Atlanta.
Yesterday we interviewed Lonnie King, and Lonnie King was saying that there had been a backroom deal made that they would support Sam Massell to be mayor, and Maynard as vice mayor, but that Sam Massell would only do one term.
Ah.
And then after that one term, he was supposed to step aside, and Maynard was going to be anointed the next mayor, but Sam Massell decided that he wanted to run for a second term.
I had not heard that story. I never heard that story, but it makes sense.
Makes sense to you?
It makes sense.
Right. So when Maynard became mayor, how did it affect your dad's business and Maynard trying to make sure that more minorities got much more contracts in the Atlanta community?
When Mayor Jackson took over the office of mayor, it really made he had a major impact on businesses in Atlanta just by establishing the affirmative action program for the city of Atlanta. It opened up doors that had not been open for minority business. Even though our company had been established in the 50s, the type of construction work that was available to us was primarily subcontracting work. And by setting minority participation goals, Mayor Jackson allowed many firms to take advantage of new vehicles to grow their businesses. For us, it created joint venture opportunities that we had never had before, especially in the public works area. We had been a subcontractor and provided plastering services and other types of services in the construction market, but by having the affirmative action goals that were set, majority companies were forced to bring in minority companies. And for us, it provided a new level of experience and exposure that we had never had before. So the JV model specifically made a huge impact for our company because it allowed us to grow in ways that we had not been able to, both locally and nationally. And it allowed us to JV with national firms also outside of Atlanta. So Mayor Jackson had a major impact on our business specifically, and I'm sure many others.
This is great. I mean, so the audience won't know. Tell us about your dad when he started the company, why he started the company, and how the company developed in the 50s into the 60s.
My father, Herman Russell, had a father who was a plasterer. So my grandfather, Rogers Russell, taught all of his sons how to be plasterers. And my father was the youngest. He took up the trade with sort of a fervor to really take it to a new level. And by the age of really 16, had built his own duplex using leftover wood and supplies that my grandfather had. So back then, they would do plastering jobs. They even did, for instance, the governor's mansion. They did all the plastering for Talmadge. Yeah, Governor Talmadge. And that exposure and just being around whites in those environments made my father realize that there was much more out there. So he dreamed of doing more with what my grandfather had established. He went to Tuskegee and took up building as his major. And from that, he did odd jobs in Tuskegee while he was even in school, and even brought my uncle down to help him. And they actually got in trouble with the local subcontractors because they started taking too much business away from some of the local contractors. early on, my father had a shoe shine business, a newspaper route. You know, he was an entrepreneur at heart. So I think that coming back to an Atlanta with that educational foundation and being in an environment where there were other business leaders on Auburn Avenue who took an interest in him. And also, you know, he got a few breaks from decent whites in the community that gave him his first loan at CNS Bank. You know, he was able as a young black man to go and get a loan. And by paying that back in a timely manner, he built a level of respect in the community. So I think all of the stars were in order for him with what was going on at the time, both from a leadership standpoint, a political standpoint, what Dr. King was doing with the civil rights movement. It just all came together.
So by the mid-60s, how big was this company?
We were still relatively small.
By the mid-60s.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
By the mid-60s, we were still relatively small by national standards. But for minority business, we had a presence that was, I guess, respected. I can't tell you exactly the size standard, but, you know, we did work, and my father was able to.
So Maynard is mayor. Explain to the audience what it means when you say that. I understand affirmative action, but the audience will understand what it meant by joint ventures. What is that exactly, a joint venture?
A construction joint venture or any business joint venture means that generally a majority firm will partner with a smaller minority firm and open those firms up to the way that business is done. For instance, if you would, let me start over on this one.
Yeah, take your time.
I'm trying to think of the best way.
If you want to draw from an example that your dad used, it might be easy.
Well, I thought the question was explain how.
Joint venture works.
Yeah. When we speak of joint ventures, I speak of, or anyone. Cut.
It's all right, keep going. We're fine.
You a family.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, it's no problem.
Edit my big mouth.
Get it
out,
right.
all that.
How you want it.
Yeah.
It's an agreement, I'm here to work.
Okay.
Settle.
This doesn't be ready.
I'm ready.
Okay.
When I speak of joint ventures, I'm speaking of an opportunity for companies to come together and learn from each other and share the work. So joint ventures in the construction arena allowed a firm like ours, H.J. Russell & Company, to partner with a majority company and actually bring our employees in with their employees to learn the work and share in the work. So we would have superintendents who had specific responsibilities for work, along with leaders in the joint venture who would report on schedules, provide information, and keep us updated. So it provided a vehicle which allowed us to learn construction at new levels, at a higher level, and at the general contractor level versus being a subcontractor and specifically focusing in on a particular area of work.
That's great. That's a great answer. We interviewed George Berry yesterday.
Really?
Yeah, and he talked about how when they was talking about the work on the airport, how that Maynard said that if those guys, the white majority owners, construction people, didn't want to have any minority involvement, that he would never let that airport go.
Yeah,
You know,
I've heard that before.
And so he would say to these guys, you want either 75% of something or 100% of nothing.
Right.
You know, and so I guess your dad, the Russell Company, was involved in the airport.
Yes.
So talk about that.
H.J. Russell & Company was involved in the construction of the new Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport back in the early 70s. At that time, again, as a result of the affirmative action programs, we were able to joint venture on the People Mover project, which is actually the train system between the concourses at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. So we actually built I can't remember exactly who the joint venture partners were. I think it was Batson, Cook, and J. Jones. I may be wrong on that. But we joint ventured with those national construction firms to build that People Mover system that moved passengers among all of the concourses underground.
Because it's so effectively, in my opinion.
Yes, yes. And the other thing, though, with us is that Concessions, I actually managed Concessions International. I don't know if you're going to get to that question, but my experience with Maynard is more on the concession side than the construction
So tell us
side.
about Concessions International.
Concessions International is a company that my father formed in the early 70s, and our first airport concessions work was actually in Los Angeles. But back in 1995, after Maynard had completed his 2 terms as mayor of Atlanta, we had an opportunity to bid on the new airport concessions opportunities at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. And at that time, Maynard was working in Chicago for a law firm. And he had started a new concessions company, Jackmont Hospitality, and wanted an opportunity to bid on the airport. And many people would not give him that opportunity. But my father felt very strongly that Maynard deserved the opportunity to do business in the city that he loved, that he grew up in, and that he had spent so much time building. And said to him, if you want to be part of our team, we will gladly take you on.
So why was that? Why was there such resistance to him becoming involved in businesses in Atlanta, in your opinion?
My father always said, Herman always said that Maynard was basically blackballed. Let me start over. My father felt that Mayor Jackson had been blackballed by insisting that minorities participate in new levels in Atlanta. And after his term as mayor was over, he couldn't find a job in Atlanta and had to go to Chicago to find work. And he felt very strongly that Maynard had played too much of a role in this city to not have an opportunity to participate in some type of business venture here. And felt that he deserved the right to be part of our bid. And it was a controversial decision at the time because there were many people who did not want and did not feel that he should participate. And it was a bidding process, so there was some risk in it. But I remember my father just saying it's the right thing to do, and we're gonna do it.
Wow, really controversial. People were really upset about
Yeah.
him being involved. So how does the Concessions International work? I mean, I go to these airports all the time, and I buy my magazines and all that stuff. Which concessions are you involved in at the airport?
Concessions International currently operates all of the food and beverage on Concourse B. Not all. Take that back. Concessions International currently operates food and beverage on Concourse B, and we have probably about 60% of the food and beverage on Concourse B. We license, franchise, develop our own proprietary brands, and we operate them. Actually, on Concourse B, Atlanta Hospitality Partners is a subcontractor or subtenant of ours with Fridays on Concourse B. TGI Fridays.
I see. Now I got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, Maynard Jackson sort of set the standard for affirmative action and minority ownership in lots of businesses in Atlanta, which is a boom for the city. I mean, most of us who live outside of Atlanta think of Atlanta as a city for black entrepreneurship, black businesses, So if I had to ask you, what's, in your opinion, what would be Maynard Jackson's legacy? What would you say? Not only to the city of Atlanta, but to America.
Maynard Jackson, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many Atlantans, singularly changed business opportunities for African Americans across this country. I know from being in the airport concessions business that if it had not been for having a mayor like Maynard, who was not afraid to stand up for what he knew was right and to insist upon it, regardless of the cost that of what it may cost him personally, and to insist that majority companies include minority firms in ways that it had never been, then many companies and many individuals would not enjoy the benefits, both from a business standpoint and financially, that we currently enjoy. I believe that Maynard was courageous in his determination to do what was right, not only for the city of Atlanta, but for the nation, because the model that we created in Atlanta really is still looked upon across the country as the model that drove change for Black businesses and other minority-owned businesses.
Great answer. Really good answer. Why don't you take a sip out of
Yeah.
another question?
All right.
Where were you the day that Maynard passed away? When did you hear about it?
Okay. I remember being at work with my father the day that Maynard passed. And I remember we were actually in a meeting, and he got a phone call that took him back then. This was before cell phones, if I'm not mistaken. He left the room, and he came back in tears. And he literally couldn't even get the words out to tell us what had happened. So it was a great loss for him personally and for everyone, because we all knew what that meant. The champion for the cause that was so important for us was gone. So we were in a meeting, and we got the news.
Let's cut.
Cutting. Rolling sound? Sound rolling?
Sound speeds.
Okay, and, okay, go ahead, call it.
Donata Russell will take 3.
And Mark? All right, hold on, give us a second, Sam.
Tell us what.
Right with it.
Okay.
In this political climate, do you think?
In our current political climate, and with the changes that will happen soon in our leadership at the top levels of this nation, we need an individual like Maynard, some young person, to come forward and lead us. In this new environment, we are at a point where there's division in our country, where young people are confused. I know my own young children are uncertain what this means, and I've actually said to them, this is a time for you guys to mobilize, to understand the reality of the environment that we live in, and to make some changes. So I do believe that we're searching for the Maynard of today's environment to come forward, and we need someone like Maynard to take us.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
Anything else?
What it is that I want. So, okay. Was there a time? How far are you with Beth apart?
Beth and I are probably around the same age.
Did
Yeah.
y'all ever have any interaction? Because I know Beth was like on the campaign trail. Can you tell us about like, you know, what was the energy like during that?
I don't know.
No.
Growing up when Maynard was campaigning.
Climate during the first campaign.
You know, I actually feel like our parents protected us more when we were young. Okay. I feel like when we were young, I believe that our parents protected us from a lot of the turmoil and segregation that we were faced with. I know that for me personally, I grew up not really realizing how bad things were because Atlanta was a community where there were blacks that were affluent, and we spent time together. We had our own bowling alleys we could go to. We had activities that we could do. So for me, I feel that I was somewhat shielded from the realities of the environment that we were faced with at the time. However, at the same time, we had the Dr. Kings, the Maynard Jacksons. We had leaders in our community that we looked up to. So much like young people today had Barack Obama, we had Maynard Jackson to look up to really see what was possible. So there was I never had the feeling that there were any limits to what we could do or could become.
That's good sound.
Okay, let's get room tone. Quiet, please.
Michael, should
Be
I
room
forget?
tone
I
for
know.
the Donita interview.
Great.
No, you did do great.
We just need to be quiet for 1 minute. Get room tone. Thank you. Let's cut.